What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you part 2 of our Divinity Original Sin 2 story series where I cover the main plot. So just as a reminder, if you didn't watch part 1, I'm not covering like a ton of the side quests. I'm going to cover some of them because they're inherently related to the main plot, but for the most part I'm not focusing on them at all. I'm not really covering the origin stories in depth, but at the end of the video I will recap what we learned about all 6 of the origin stories in the act that we're focusing on, which today is, of course, Act 2. Now, in Act 1, we left off with our heroes having managed to escape Fort Joy, and they are traveling with Malady to the ship that was attacked by the Seekers so we could leave the island while we fought Bishop Alexander. When we arrive on the ship, our companions that are with us, whoever we chose to hang out with in Fort Joy, will immediately leave the party. Now, if you did not talk to any of the origin characters, they will still be on the ship here. Just because you didn't speak to them on Fort Joy doesn't mean they didn't come with onto the ship. Once that's done, we can go talk to Malady and Gareth, who are having an argument up on the main deck of the ship near the steering wheel. They are having a bit of a disagreement because Malady is super callous about all of the people that died, which, by the way, if you don't see all the bodies, a bunch of the Seekers at the camp you were at in Fort Joy, the Seekers camp, have in fact died during this battle. There's still quite a few alive, but many of them did not make it. Gareth and Malady both explain that the ship won't move because it is not a regular ship, it is a ship made out of live wood called the Lady Vengeance. And live wood, if you're unfamiliar, is basically the wood from an ancestor tree, which is a tree inhabited by the spirit of an elf, which means they took wood that was literally inhabited by a sentient being and turned it into a ship. And for whatever reason, this ship refuses to move, presumably because you are not Dallas, who the ship actually belongs to. We met her in Act 1 as well. So basically this conversation tells us that we need to get this ship moving, explore, and figure it out. Now, this is a good time to re-recruit the companions that you plan on using. So whatever origin characters you're hanging out, or whoever you want to have in your party, you need to recruit them now. And I mean, like, before you get the ship moving. Bit of a spoiler alert before we get into the actual part of it. This is the point of no return for the origin characters. Whoever you leave this ship with is basically your choice for the rest of the game. The other options that you did not choose to hang out with, they, well, spoiler alert, they die on this ship. In just a little bit, actually. With that out of the way, recruit your companions you plan on getting, and then, book it on. Real quick before we go into the rest of the explanation, though, I will say that everything in Act 1, choice-wise, doesn't matter a ton. There are a few things that can carry over, say if Gareth happened to die, the story will continue. However, obviously Gareth won't be aboard the ship with you now, that kind of stuff. But the game will continue. So there are a few things from Act 1 that can carry over like that, but most of your decisions in Act 1 with Fort Joy, they don't matter. Not in terms of actual outcomes you have to deal with, I'll put it that way. That said, pretty much from this point on, the decisions you make tend to have effects later in the game, so it's just something to keep in mind. Back to the matter at hand, the ship is made of live wood, it won't move, we need to get it to move, we need to explore. So, basically what you need to do here is find a book on a soldier that is dead on the main deck here. And it is actually a diary where he explains that he heard someone trying to talk to a door that requires a password, and they said fortitude is the password. And while you're nearby that soldier, you may be tempted to go talk to the Lady Vengeance because the head at the front of the ship, I don't pretend to know what they call that. I assume there's an actual name for it, but that serves as the ship's head. And if you go try to talk to it before you figure this quest out, your character will die and you'll have to be resurrected. Now, in addition to Malady and Gareth telling us about the ship, they also mention that Bishop Alexander is not dead, despite us trying to kill him at the end of Act 1 and him serving as the last boss of Act 1. He somehow survived and is unconscious in the very bottom of the ship. Once we have the book from the soldier, we can go down to that part of the ship, where we will also find a magic mirror, by the way. Mirrors will let you re-roll your character if you're unhappy with how they are. Just a side note, not super important to the story. We'll find Alexander being guarded by a Seeker and a Magister. The Seeker can be persuaded to let you in, and the Magister will be protecting Alexander, And it is possible to instigate a fight with that Magister. It wouldn't, like, not aggro anybody, because, it's a Magister and the Seekers don't care if that Magister dies. That said, you can kill Alexander again right here. Again, it doesn't really matter. Kill him if you want. We'll talk about the consequences of that decision later. Or search his body. And, if you kill him, then search his body. Otherwise, just, frisk the guy while he's asleep through dialogue. And you will find a special necklace that looks important. Grab it, and then on the ship you'll make your way to this very odd-looking door that you've probably noticed already by just exploring the ship. This door, I forget the exact name for it, they do mention it, but honestly I don't remember what it was. But either way, this is a door that is inhabited by some sort of spirit to take basic commands. Now what you need to do is use the necklace you found on Alexander's body, put it in the door, and then speak the password, which is Fortitude, to get it to open, which opens up Dallas's chambers, where she presumably kept the secret of how to get the ship moving. Now in here you're going to meet a guy named Tarquin. Through dialogue, you will find out that this man was kept by Dallas and forced to do magical projects for her, which is very important to the story later. However, he's very clearly a necromancer, and should you choose to, you can actually just kill him outright. It's fine. He's, not the nicest guy in the world, and he's super shady, so totally understandable decision should you choose to do that. However, I recommend you don't. He is involved with an integral side quest, and I say integral because it gives you a really awesome item at the end of it, and I actually don't want to spoil it, but while Tarquin actually has an important role in the main story, it already happened before you meet him, if that makes sense. He did something that is important later, but his continued existence is unimportant, but we'll get into all that in the future. So, once we've dealt with Tarquin however we deemed necessary, we will find a book that explains the lizard slave marks used in the ancient empire of the lizards and how they activate them through songs. And in this book, we will find the song needed to restart the live wood ship and basically awaken it to listen to us so it will sail us where we need to go. Now, in this room, before you leave, you can pick up the teleporter pyramids, which are an awesome mechanic. Basically, you pick them up, and they can teleport you to any of the other teleporter pyramids. So one you'll find on the table next to Tarquin, and when you pick it up, to find the other one, you can either find a hatch in this room, or you can just do the more fun thing, which is to activate the other teleporter pyramid, which will then teleport you to the one you're missing, which is a throwback all the way to the original Divine Divinity, which was fun. If you choose to do that, you're going to fight two Geists, which are the Geists that Dallas had at her side when we saw her in Act 1. So you'll have to kill those guys to pick up the second teleporter pyramid, but you should totally do that. They're very handy. Once we have all that, we need to go talk to the ship. So we bring that book, we sing the song to the ship, it awakens, it basically asks, are you going to set it free and let it be a ship, or are you going to force it to do your bidding like Dallas did? Either way, the ship will, be your base. Either it'll be thankful for freeing it, and, it's a ship, so it's still got to sail somewhere, or you'll forcefully tell it where to go. It doesn't really make much of a difference, but just to give you some flavor of the conversation. Unfortunately, while we are taking off, we are intercepted by Dallas and a guy named Riedemann.
With the sun on their backs and the wind in their sails, the God-woken watched Fort Joy shrink behind them. But their capture of the Lady Vengeance had not gone unnoticed.
Now, Riedemann, if you read Bishop Alexander's diary when you defeated him in Act 1, he will mention that Dallas was having him trained by a guy named Riedemann, because Bishop Alexander is himself a Godwoken, being the son of Lucian the Divine, and that in order to expand his knowledge and for him to hopefully ascend to the mantle of Divine, they gave him a tutor, a guy named Riedemann, who for whatever reason seems insanely loyal to Dallas. There is a reason why, but we'll get into all of that later. It's not super important right this second. Now, during this fight, most all of the Seekers that survived the initial battle die the first round of this fight because Riedemann summons a meteor strike and kills all of them right in front of you. Now, the objective of this fight is not to win. It's I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's incredibly difficult to win this through straight up killing everything. What you need to do is protect Malady. So Malady is going to start channeling a spell, which you don't really know what it's going to do, but clearly it's the exit. It seems like a teleport of some sort upon your first viewing. You need to just protect Malady for about, I think it's 5 or 6 turns before she finishes casting whatever spell it is she's casting. Now, I will say, if you're having trouble with this fight, because it can be a bit of a pain on higher difficulties if you're kind of new to the game, the best thing to do, in my opinion, is use the Medusa Head skill from the Metamorph tree, because most of the enemies in this fight, actually a lot of them don't have magic armor to resist that, and the ones that do don't have a ton of it. So it's actually really easy to just completely lock the entire set of enemies down with the Medusa Head ability, and cheese walk this even on like honor mode. That said, once Malady manages to get her spell off, she teleports the entire ship to the Hall of Echoes. Now once...
With the help of the half-demon Malady, the God-Woken escaped through the veil that separates life from death.
To get to the Hall of Echoes after this fight, you're going to wake up in kind of a strange place. While you follow the path down, you're going to see the gods strung up in a tree. You need to find your character's god, the one that spoke to you earlier in Act 1. You need to use the Bless skill that they gave you on that character, and then your god will wake up and have a conversation where they explain that the void is draining the gods of their power, and it is absolutely imperative that a new divine rise, and rise quickly. The gods are afraid. They're about to be wiped out by the void, so time is of the essence. And with that in mind, your god transports you back to consciousness, which you wake up on the Lady Vengeance inside the Hall of Echoes, kind of sailing through the air. We need to actually head down below decks, where we will pass the dead Origin characters that did not make it, because like I said, any Origin characters that did not come with you past talking to the Lady Vengeance straight up died in the fight. From here, we need to go down to the bottom deck. We need to talk to Malady and Co., where Malady will finish teleporting us out of the Hall of Echoes outside of Driftwood in Reaper's Coast.
The chill of the Hall of Echoes clung to the Lady Vengeance as it returned to the shores of Reaper's Coast. The God-Woken were alive, but what of the gods?
Now, once we arrive in Reaper's Coast, we can talk to Malady again, where she's going to instruct us to go find Meister Siva, the head of the Seekers, because Meister Siva will know what to do to continue you on your path to becoming the divine. You can take this time to explain to Malady what happened to the gods and what you saw, or keep it to yourself. It doesn't matter a ton. But from here, you can go over to a small rowboat that is docked on the side of the Lady Vengeance, and you can use that to get to shore. Once you're going along the shore, you're probably going to come across this caravan right outside of Driftwood that was attacked by Voidwoken, and there's dead everywhere. Slightly north of this area is the entrance to the town of Driftwood. And within viewing distance of that entrance, you can actually see a gallows. If you go to that gallows, you can actually find Meister Siva strung up, shall we say, ready for the gallows. She's being punished because, she's a sorcerer. But they know who she is, that she's the head of the Seekers, so they are intentionally torturing this woman. Now, because we need to talk to Meister Siva, we obviously need to free her, and we do that by, freeing her and getting into a fight with all these Magisters by doing so, or killing them first and then freeing her. It doesn't matter a ton. Either way, you're going to have to fight these Magisters, is really what it boils down to. And it is a bit of a pain, so you need to separate on higher difficulties, mind you, I should say. If you're playing on higher difficulties, you need to separate the main one, Executor Ninian, I don't know how to pronounce her name. But she will have an evasion aura that you need to deal with, because if she's close to other characters, she gives them an aura of evasion and makes them incredibly hard to hit, which is very annoying. Once you finish this fight, you can talk to Meister Siva, where she heads back to her house in Driftwood and is incredibly rude to you the entire time. Now, from here, we need to follow her to her house, deal with her being incredibly rude, get down into her vault where she has where she will explain to you the process of continuing on the path of becoming divine. There is actually a ritual you will need to perform. She has the ingredients for performing the ritual once in her vault here, which you can then grab, which is a ritual bowl, a lancelet, as well as a substance called blackroot. So you put the blackroot in the bowl, you stab yourself with the lancet, mix your blood in with the blackroot, and then set that bowl on fire, and it will create a foggy portal. If you have a source point, you can click on that portal to be transported to the Hall of Echoes, or at least the tile set for the Hall of Echoes, because technically you're looking inside your own soul. But Meister Siva explains all this, and then we of course do it. And when we go into our soul, we find our god yet again. This time, our god explains that they've had to take refuge in your soul to hide from the void. And they will give you the ability of spirit vision. And then the particular entity that is giving you this information will tell you that in order to become the next divine, you need to greatly expand your ability to channel Source, because Source is life, basically. What they instruct us to do is find masters of the Source who can teach us to expand our Source abilities. So that's the information we get sent off with, and then we head back into the real world where we can tell Meister Siva about this. Meister Siva will explain that there should be a list of known sorcerers who were too powerful to capture in the Magister's barracks. However, I will tell you, that is not all of them. There are a couple more besides what is in this list that you can find down there. Now, this is going to be the bulk of Act 2 right here, is finding these masters, doing what they ask of you so you can learn to channel Source, or killing them, because honestly, most of them are terrible. We are going to go through these masters that you can find in Act 2 one by one. Now, I want to say, you do not have to do what they're asking of you to expand your Source. The game will continue even if all of these masters die before teaching you what you need to know. However, we are going to go over what happens in that case towards the end. So for now, we're going to go through each master, kind of explain what you need to do to learn from them. But keep in mind, even if you just kill them outright, because again, many of them are awful, awful people, it doesn't really matter, because the game will continue. So the easiest one to start with is Mortise. And I say that because A, it's probably the only level appropriate one to follow right when you get to Driftwood. And moreover, his whole thing kind of starts in Driftwood, so it just makes logical sense to start with Mortise. Mortise is actually working for the dwarves that are located in Driftwood as well. There's a bit of like a criminal dwarven activity going on in Driftwood, and Mortise works for them. This is also the subject of the side quest where you side with either the Magisters or the dwarves in Driftwood. And because I hate Magisters, I pretty much always side with the dwarves, but keep in mind you can side with the Magisters and then do that route as well. But basically, I recommend killing all the Magisters you see because they're the worst. Especially the White Magister Raymond, because you can meet him here in Driftwood. You don't really understand his importance as a character yet. However, you can choose to side with the Magisters and help him in his investigation. But he leaves that in the hands of a guy standing next to him, known as Magister. I believe it's Julian is his name. You can go that way, help the Magisters, or, you can do what I like to do, which is kill them, because if you kill Magister Raymond now, it saves you a lot of trouble later. I won't elaborate more than that, but, it's a difficult fight now, but it's a lot easier if you do it now rather than later. Like I said, you can side with the dwarves. So if you side with the dwarves, you meet a dwarf named Lohar, and he was recently attacked by a seemingly mind-controlled woman that worked for him for an incredibly long time, who was practically family. He helped raise this girl, and she out of nowhere tried to kill him and is babbling like a loon. So Lohar explains that this is obviously very unusual behavior, and a guy who works for him named Mortise is missing, and that's a problem. He asks you to go investigate Mortise's house. And if you do that, you will find that some of Lohar's dwarves are in fact guarding the place, but if you tell them Lohar sent you, they're like, all right, whatever, go do your thing. And when you search Mortise's house, you will find his notes about how he is trying to perform a ritual called the Mord Akim and has been mind-controlling dwarves to do what he wants them to do. But more importantly, he explains that he's doing all this from a cave in the cliffs to the west of town. So that's obviously where we're going to head next, and as we head through the cliffs there, we get attacked by possessed dwarves several times. There's a fight with some Voidwoken again, until we reach the actual cave where all this is happening at. Now this part is crazy, and it's probably some of the best stuff done in Act 2, to be honest. So when you arrive inside this cave, you'll find bodies everywhere. There's a dwarf girl scared out of her mind, shouting about stuff. And as you go forward, you'll come to a dead end. Now you have two options here, and this is actually what I love about the level design of this place. If you go to the very edge of this cliff and actually use abilities to jump down, you can skip this entire dungeon. However, if you don't have an ability or you don't realize you can make it down to the area where you can see, and you turn around, you'll be attacked by 4 Voidwoken. And you can't win this fight. They will cocoon your people, wrap you guys up, and then take you into a dungeon where they will separate your group. And you have to kind of bring them back together. By the way, if you have the teleporter pyramids, that's a lot easier to do. But basically, you got to get all your guys back together in this cave that is filled with Voidwoken. And down here, you'll find a couple of things that are important. One, you can find a dwarf woman working in a laboratory of sorts. And she's also clearly insane, but she is tinkering with a device that delivers death fog. Death fog, if you remember, is a substance that kills people on contact. If you're alive and you get hit by death fog, congratulations, now you're dead. And she's tinkering with a device that, uses it, a device that is used to deliver death fog. She explains that this device was actually crafted by a woman named Haneg, which is actually a lizard woman. So, this is also important because she explains that this is being done at Queen Justinia, the queen of the dwarves' behest, and that's all that we're going to go into with that right now. From here, once we get out of this dungeon and back up to where technically we just were, the lower part of the first area of the dungeon that you come into that you could have jumped down to, and you will find Mortise up ahead. Like many of the fights in honor mode or tactician mode, I recommend a certain amount of cheese. On tactician and stuff, this is a difficult fight if you try to do it outright. However, if you don't waste your time trying to talk to Mortise and just teleport him up to where you start the fight, or start the area at, on top of this little ship area, you can basically avoid all of his guys for like 2 or 3 turns and focus him down. Because once he goes down, the rest of them die. So, that said, if you kill a bunch of the enemies that are his followers without killing him, he uses a ritual called the Mortise, or Mortise, however you want to pronounce it, to grow exponentially in power and becomes damn near impossible. So do yourself a favor, just cheese this fight if you're on a high difficulty. Once you defeat him, he does not die. He actually goes down, and then you have a conversation with him. Now, you can use this conversation to have him explain what the hell he's doing down here, which is basically that he is doing this to all these people, killing all these people, mind controlling all these people to perform a ritual called the Mortise, which will give him a ton of power. He learned of this ritual through an entity known as the God King, which is why he's in league with the Void, because the God King works for the Void. Now, we don't get a ton of information on that right here. We actually get more on that later, but that's kind of the gist of it. Now, basically, we can be like, all right, Mortise, teach us how to channel more source since you're a master of it, and we won't kill you. You can then learn to channel 1 extra point of source this way. Doing so is gross. This is probably a pretty gross dialogue option, to be honest. He produces some black tumoury thing and makes you eat it, but it does in fact expand your ability to channel source. And at this point, you can let him go or kill him. Or you can kill him outright. You can kill him without eating the cancery tumor thing and not learning to expand your source. That's how Mortise wraps up. And from here, you can take the information about Mortise and all of the information about what Queen Justinia is doing and back to Lohar, and that will resolve that quest thread. Now, from there, we move on to the next Master of Source. The easiest one after this is usually Riker. Riker is a elf in the Stone Garden Cemetery nearby, and he is a weirdo. So, he's super into necromancy, and he basically reanimates people and corpses and lives by himself with all these undead mass servants. He does seem to have a thing for animals, though, because you will find them all over his mansion in the cemetery, which is weird. If you go talk to Riker, he does not immediately attack you, but you do go talk to him. And he knows why you're there. He knows that you want to learn how to channel more source, and he says he'll teach you to do this if you go do something for him. That nearby is an area called the Black Pits. And in the Black Pits, there is a tablet that he needs. And if you bring it to him, he will teach you how to channel more source. So for Riker, we're going to do exactly that. Now, Black Pits actually has a ton going on. There is tons of stuff happening in the Black Pits. But focusing on specifically what we need to do for Riker, we need to go down there, we need to enter the cave in the Black Pits, get down to the bottom of the Black Pits, which is actually an area that used to be some sort of temple or something for the Eternals. While we're down there, we're going to learn that the Magisters were already there, and that Dallas had them searching for something, and they found it. It was called the Aetiran. We don't know exactly what it is, but once we get to the very bottom of the Black Pits, which was like this eternal race temple thing, we can find a trapped Eternal known as Aetira. And Aetira gives us a ton of information and is a big plot moment when this happens. So Aetira explains that basically the gods aren't really gods, that they stole their power from the God King and the rest of the Eternals once the scholar Feign, the exact same origin character that you can play with, discovered a thing called the Veil, which was this kind of blanket of source that separated Rivellon from the Void. When the Seven Lords, who later became the Seven Gods, learned about this, they used that information to sabotage the entire rest of the Eternal race and cast them into the Void so they could take the divine power of the Source for themselves, thus becoming gods. Aetira, in addition to giving this information, is also the creator of the Aetiran, which is a wand that can drain the Source from absolutely anything with no limit on how much, which is obviously a very big deal when you're a god whose entire existence relies on Source. So we get all of that information from Aetira. We will then fight Aetira. That's an annoying fight too. Use Medusa head, makes it a ton easier, but once we get done with that fight, we will actually be able to find the tablet that Riker was looking for, and then we can take that tablet back to Riker. Once we do that, we can again have Riker expand our Source or kill him because he's the worst. That said, even if he expands your Source, he will then attack you. Unlike with the Mortise situation where you could let him go afterwards, there's no situation where Riker doesn't try to kill you, even if he expands your Source channeling abilities. Now, after you defeat Riker, I just want to mention that in the basement of his mansion here is where you'll find the other one of the other teleporter pyramids. There's this chest in a room across the way, and you need source points to get into it, but it will have one of the other teleporter pyramids for giving you a total of 3 out of 4 of them. Because we were in the Black Pits area, the next one we are going to talk about is Hanag. Now actually in the forest to the west, we can actually first run into Hanag, where she actually is. And she is being attacked by Magisters because of course, she's a sorcerer. And if we choose to help Hanag by killing these Magisters that are trying to pursue her, she will stop channeling all the crazy environmental magic and allow you to come talk to her. Hanag is a master of portal magic. And as I mentioned earlier, she also invented the Death Fog delivery device that was used to wipe out the elves so long ago when they were attacked with Death Fog. Now, Hanag, if you ask her about teaching you to channel Source, she will say that she thanks you for saving her, but that's not enough. She's actually not sure what happened to her apprentice, who was last seen in the Black Pits area. She was forced to run away from the Magisters, and she hasn't been able to check in on him. If you will go make sure he's alive, she will then teach you to channel more Source. We were just in the Black Pits, which is why I bring this up. Getting into the Black Pits, you would have passed by an event where a family was being interrogated and possibly executed by Magisters. After that, you will have passed an area where a young man was being tortured on some gallows right outside the cave that the Black Pits is in. So, the young man who's being tortured on the gallows is, in fact, who we need to talk to for this. He is Hanag's apprentice being interrogated by White Magisters. The White Magisters being the leaders of the rest of the Magisters. We need to basically make sure that Hanag's apprentice gets out of this situation alive. That said, that is more easily said than done, because if we start this fight with him at the top of the gallows area, a bunch of oily Voidwoken get summoned in as soon as Hanag's apprentice uses a Source ability. It will summon a ton of Voidwoken, and then you will have to fight all those Voidwoken. There will be fire everywhere. It's a nightmare. The fight itself isn't necessarily hard to win. It's keeping him alive in that fight that's a pain. So the easiest thing to do is just teleport him away from the Magisters and kind of trap him with objects like a ways away. So basically what you can do is teleport him away, make it difficult for him to try to join the fight because he will still be like aggroed into the combat. However, he'll be so far away that he won't use his source abilities, summoning the Voidwoken, and then if you kill the 3 Magisters before he uses a source spell, you'll be able to do the fight without the Voidwoken being summoned, which makes it 10 times easier and you won't have to waste a ton of time. Now once you talk to the apprentice after this fight, if he's still alive, he will talk about his family, which was the family being interrogated that I just mentioned a little bit earlier. And regardless of how that plays out, the apprentice goes on his way, and you can then report back to Hanag. Now, if he died, Hanag is not going to help you, period. However, if he lived, you can choose to have Hanag help you. That said, she draws her source powers from the surrounding environment. So if you choose to do this, and you have the pet pal talent, it will actually go away because she kills a bunch of animals by sucking the source out of them, which is how she expanded her source powers and became a master of the source. Keep that in mind. If you learn from her, you're going to lose the pet pal talent. And that brings us to Sahala. So, Sahala is the elf we met in the Fort Joy area of Act 1. She is an important elf to the elves there. So a little north of Driftwood and the Paladins' like little fort area, we can run into Sahala. Well, not Sahala specifically, but a bunch of elves, and one of them is named Tova. If you go through the dialogue appropriately, without enraging the elves while they bury their fellow elf who died, the elf Tova will explain that Sahala, her daughter, was actually kidnapped by Roost Anlon, the lone wolves in the mill to the north. And that unfortunately, in trying to rescue her, several of their elf compatriots have died, and she'll ask you to go rescue Sahala. And we can do this. We can go up to the mill to the north. There are ways to enter this area without initiating combat. However, you cannot rescue Sahala while also staying combat free. The lone wolves are the worst, and if you kill them, you'll find out, they have a contract out to kill any Godwoken they find. They're being paid to do so by someone. And if you go talk to their leader, a guy named Roost Anlon, he will attack you because you're Godwoken and he wants the bounty. However, Roost Anlon is a very important character involved in a few different of the origin quests, as well as a couple other things. And he's keeping Sahala captive in that room, and you can fight him. It's not a terribly difficult fight, to be honest, as long as you're the appropriate level. You can fight him, you can free Sahala, exit her out of the camp, and guide her back to her mother's elf camp. And if you do that, Sahala will offer to help you learn how to channel more source by connecting you with nature. Which honestly, of all the options, is probably like the most innocent, shall we say, way of expanding your source abilities. Now, much like Hanag's apprentice, it is very possible for Sahala to die while you do this, and if she does, she obviously can't teach you anything because she'll be dead. So if you want to learn from her, make sure she, stays alive. And that brings us to Jahan and the Advocate. Jahan and the Advocate are kind of tied together in a way, but they can both teach you how to channel your source powers. Now, if you have Losa with you, Jahan is a big part of her origin character story, so just keep that in mind. However, otherwise, you'll just find him in the woods, kind of near where you talk to Hanag at, like a little north and a little east of that. You'll find him in a hut with a bunch of demons in a cage, which is creepy, but Jahan will explain that he'll teach you how to channel your source powers if you go to Blood Moon Island, a demon-infested, awful place of an island, and kill a demon named the Advocate. If you do this, Jahan will expand your source powers. Now, getting to Blood Moon Island is actually a bit of a pain, because Blood Moon Island is surrounded by death fog, which means you either need to be undead, in which case you can actually take the ferry there, because there's an undead ferryman who will ferry you across the lake to Blood Moon Island, but if you're undead, that's the only way to live through it, because if you're just a normal living person, you'll die because it's death fog laden lake. If you're anyone else and you're not an undead character, you have to go across the bridge, which initially seems broken, but you'll notice these little spectral walking plates that you can use. However, there are traps all along this area, and if you trigger them, the spectral walking places will disappear and you'll fall to your death in the death fog. So once you've navigated that bridge and you get across to the other side, you'll be greeted by 3 demons who don't attack you immediately, but direct you to the Advocate. And if you go talk to the Advocate, he doesn't try to kill you because that would be too easy. He's a demon, so he tries to beguile you. He will tell you 2 things. He'll expand your source powers right now for free if you just say you'll do something for him. You don't actually have to do it, but he'll expand your source powers right here, right now. And he does this by killing people way off. He basically takes source from someone else to give it to you and kind of teaches you about that interaction. So you can learn to channel your source powers right here through the Advocate. And the Advocate will explain that he'll do this in exchange for the promise that you'll do something. And what that something is going and killing the Black Ring members at the center of the Blood Moon Island. So the Black Ring is basically just a cultist group of necromancers. And if you go kill this group for the Advocate, in addition to expanding your source powers, he'll also give you the location of the Nameless Isle, which we'll get into later. But if you do that, he'll show you where it is. That said, Jahan wants you to kill the Advocate, as I mentioned earlier, which you should probably do, because he's a demon. That said, you don't have to at all. There aren't really any negative consequences to helping the Advocate. There's nothing that's going to happen, really. If you kill the Advocate, it does have a small consequence, but even that also really doesn't matter that much. But if you kill the Advocate, you can go back to Jahan, who will then expand your source powers like I mentioned. And then he'll have a follow-up quest for you where he actually wants you to go learn the name of the demon that caused the problems on Blood Moon Island, which again is actually a huge part of Losa's origin character story. Just to save us some trouble, we will explore that island. You'll find out that the tree that the Black Ring members were surrounding on the middle of the island is an elven ancestor tree, which is again inhabited by a elven ancestor. But this one's been corrupted by demons, so it can't talk to anyone. And through exploration of the island, you learn that tree's name. That tree's name is Elianessa. Once you learn the tree's name, you can go speak that name to the tree, and then it'll kind of snap out of its weird fog that its mind is sort of in, and it will talk to you about what happened. And basically that she was a badly possessed elven woman who came to the Blood Moon Island, which used to be a demon research facility, shall we say, where they actively tried to cure possessions and things of that nature. However, Elianessa's case was so bad that they couldn't do anything for her. A guy named Dr. Deva was convinced he could help this woman, and in trying to help her, he actually wound up taking the demon into himself, which resulted in the complete desolation of Blood Moon Island. This demon's name is Andromalik. We bring that information back to Jahan, and he was like, I knew it! But also, no one realized that Dr. Deva was Andromalik, and Dr. Deva is just like a guy in the city of Arx who's actually the demon lord Andromalik, who's been making all these deals with people to gain power. And this is where we learn, if you have Losa with you, that that is the exact demon that is taking over Losa, and that's his name. Jahan is particularly upset about this revelation because it turns out that he's actually talked to Dr. Deva a lot about demons and stuff, so that's a thing. And then, last but not least, there is actually one more Source Master that is incredibly easy to miss, because as far as I know, nothing tells you about the location of this woman short of happening to go where she is and finding her. This woman's name is Amira. She is a succubus who used to work for the Black Ring. You will find her in the sort of shattered part of the map in the northeast area, north of the Black Pits. If you traverse this area, which is a bit of a pain because the landscape is all over the place, but if you have the abilities like wings and things that'll get you across the gaps, you can explore this area and you'll find a woman named Amira and her lover, Malady. Basically, she explains that she ran into Malady, she wanted to leave the Black Ring so her and Malady could be together, and that in leaving has become a bit of a problem because there's some sort of fog hanging over the area that is keeping wounds from healing. And she asks you to deal with this by either A, getting rid of the source of whatever's causing this fog, or escorting her and Malady out of the area. The easiest thing to do here is actually go clear the fog. Technically, both options work, they're just 2 paths to the same result, basically. But the easiest thing to do is honestly just go clear out the source of the fog. So if you go north of where you find Amira and Malady, you'll run into a Voidwoken who is intense looking, and he is causing decaying on everything around. Decaying is a status effect which prevents healing. So because of this, you need to focus him down hardcore, because you can't heal while he's alive, because healing will actually hurt you. But once you beat this fight, that clears the fog of decaying, which is preventing Mahale's wounds from healing. And if you go back to Amira, she will offer to increase your ability to channel Source as well as all the others. And then Almira will actually request to join you on the Lady Vengeance and come with you on your journeys, which is cool. That is all of the Masters of Source that can potentially increase your ability to channel Source as your god requested. Let's talk about what happens if you don't do that. As every single character I mentioned to increase your ability to channel Source can die before they teach you how to channel Source. So if that happens, you run into a bit of a fun interaction. Once it is completely impossible for you to learn to channel enough Source, you will actually be visited by a war owl who will drop off a letter from Malady, who explains that you messed up so bad that she had to make deals with demons to learn about the location of the Nameless Isle, where you need to go next. Now, this is important because if this happens, something else happens later in the game where someone doesn't make it. Let's put it that way. I will explain that when we get to that section, but that is actually still a couple videos away, so we'll get there when we get there. But keep in mind, even if all these people die and you never learn how to channel more Source, the game goes on, which I think is awesome. Let's talk about what happens if you do, obviously, increase your ability to channel more Source. You're going to do that twice. You only need to learn to do that from 2 of those mini sources I just mentioned. And each time you increase it, you can go back and perform the initial ritual that you performed with Meister Siva. And the second time you do it, you'll go in, you'll talk to your god, who explains that a god doesn't just see Source and deal with it, they take it. And she or he or whoever, teaches you the ability of Source vampirism, which is to take Source from another being, which is a useful skill. And then she sends you on your way. And the second time you do this, you will actually be teleported into your soul again like normal, but your god will actually be under attack by the Void, by 2 creatures of the Void that you'll have to help her defeat. Her, him, whatever. Once you do that, the god's like, even here, I thought we were safe. We've got to move faster. Now that you've learned to channel enough Source, we have to get to the Nameless Isle, like, now. So she teaches you, again, whoever your god happens to be, how to find the Nameless Isle. Basically gives you an urge to go there, which tells you where it is or something, which is technically the end of Act 2 in a lot of ways. Like, that's the last thing you need to do before you can go to the Nameless Isle. And then you can go talk to Malady on the Lady Vengeance and head off to the Nameless Isle. But like I mentioned, what if this doesn't happen? What are the other ways to learn the location of the Nameless Isle? In addition to learning to channel your Source powers and speaking to your god, you can, like I mentioned earlier, learn the location of the Nameless Isle from the entity known as the Advocate. If you clear out the Black Ring from Blood Moon Island for him, he will teach you the location of the Nameless Isle, so you don't have to force Malady to resort to making deals to learn that name while also not helping your god either. And the help you give the demons is inconsequential, so it's kind of like a weird neutral option. So there are 3 ways to find the location of the Nameless Isle, and once you do that, you can end Act 2 whenever you're ready by going back to the Lady Vengeance, talking to Malady, who will then take you to the Nameless Isle. So that's the end of Act 2 as far as the main plot goes. But as I mentioned, at the end of each video, I'm going to talk about the origin characters' plots, kind of what we learn. That's this part of the video. First up, we have Sabile. Sabile learned in Act 1 where the location of a guy named Roost was, which we mentioned for Sahala's part of the story. So if you bring Sabile to Roost, she kills him, obviously. But before that, there's an explanation where Sabile was kidnapped after she ran away from Elven society. Because if you talk to, especially Sahala with Sabile, you learn that Sabile was actually what is known as the Prime Scion. Elves have these priests, let's say, called Scions. They are inheritors of knowledge of the elves, and Sabile was the Prime Scion, which means when she died, she had the potential of being turned into a new mother tree. And the mother tree is what connects all of the ancestor trees that elves can turn into. Sabile knew this, hated it, because everyone treated her like this object, and that's what she had to do. So she ran away from Elven society. But she was tracked down by a man named Roost, at the behest of another guy called the Master. She doesn't know his real name. And this is stuff you can learn from a combination of Sabile and Sahala from talking to each of them. But basically what Sabile does at the end of Act 2 is she gets her revenge on Roost, explains that it feels great to get back at her kidnapper, but there's still kind of the larger plot going on with her. So that's kind of what she learns. Then we have the Red Prince. So the Red Prince left Act 1 looking for the dreamer Brahmos who could help him out. You find Brahmos in the Stone Garden Cemetery, but he's already dead. However, if you have spirit vision, you can talk to his spirit. Brahmos will then still do his dreamer stuff, despite being dead, with the Red Prince. And from this vision that they have, Brahmos and the Red Prince learn that the Red Princess is actually not too far away. So then we need to go track her down. She is east of where Roost is. You have to go kind of like out and around. The Red Princess and the Red Prince meet and have relations immediately, because as it turns out, they are both part of a prophecy that if they mate, their children will reinvigorate the race of the red dragons. I'm gonna level with you guys. I don't like this part of the story. I don't like that they tried to tie in the dragons with the lizards, because that's not how this world works. I'm not saying they can't fill it in to make more sense, but fundamentally with how they presented this, it doesn't. Dragons have a god. His name is Ouroboros. They are an entirely separate race. So them trying to say that specifically red dragons, mind you, not all dragons, red dragons, devolved somehow into lizards who then have their own god, Zoroastissa, but then they can turn back into dragons if the Red Prince and Red Princess mate and make more. It just doesn't make any sense with the fundamentals of how the world works, and I've always hated this bit. But that said, immediately once they get their mating done, you will be attacked by the God King's forces. He will explain that Sadia, the Red Princess, is actually already sworn to the God King. That's a problem. So the God King's assassins will try to kill the Red Prince, and these assassins also happen to be working for a guy named the Shadow Prince, but we'll get into more of that later. So Act 2 for the Red Prince ends with him trying to figure out what the hell is going on with the Red Princess and her possible connection to the God King. That brings us to Ifan. So if you talk to Ifan throughout Act 2, he'll explain that he was a soldier in the Divine's army. But not just that. Ifan was actually the guy who delivered the Death Fog to the elves. So when the Death Fog went off and it killed all those elves, Ifan was the guy holding the proverbial fuse. He did that. It really messed him up inside. He turned into a lone wolf afterwards because he saw all that death and destruction and said, how can this be the right thing to do? Which, yeah, I mean, fair enough. So Ifan is a member of the Lone Wolves, the guys that Roost leads. And that situation devolves pretty quick because once the Lone Wolves find out that Ifan is in fact a Godwoken that they've been paid to kill, obviously there's a bit of a problem there. Ifan's story ends with him basically realizing the Lone Wolves are also awful people and you killing them, and that's kind of it for Act 2 with Ifan. From there, we have Losa. As I mentioned, Losa learns that the demon who is possessing her periodically is none other than Andromalik, and she does that through all of the stuff with Jahan that we found out earlier. So because of that, that is Losa's part for Act 2. That's everything there is to know. We also know that Losa should never become divine, because if she becomes divine, then the demon becomes divine by proxy, because he's possessing her. So, something to keep in mind there. That brings us to Feign. Feign, the undead scholar. His stuff is in Black Pits with Atira. All that conversation earlier with Atira, when she explains that Feign discovered the veil of source that surrounded the world and how his actions basically allowed the gods to become gods and cast out the God King and the rest of the Eternals to the void. So from this, we learn that the God King is the direct result of Feign's discoveries. And because of this, Feign and his family were actually banished by the God King before all that overthrowing stuff happened, and his family spent eternity, practically, in a tomb. So we learn that Feign's family paid dearly for his discoveries, and that his discoveries led inadvertently to the creation of the gods. Atira explains all of this, herself being an eternal as well. So that's what we get from Feign, and the big thing there is that Feign knows the God King personally. Feign literally knew the God King when Feign was like, not trapped for centuries. Like, the God King is somebody Feign met. And then lastly, that gives us Beast. Beast in Act 2 needs to find Lohar, which we did way towards the beginning of the video. While we're doing all that stuff with Mortise and Lohar and learning about what's going on, with Beast, we find out that not only was Queen Justinia complicit in the research of that Death Fog delivery advice, that they actually stole a bunch of Death Fog from a Magister ship nearby that you can actually explore. And once Beast learns this, he knows for sure that Queen Justinia is going to use this on the Dwarven rebels who she cannot seem to get rid of. So Queen Justinia's rule is very much so threatened by a band of Dwarven rebels that she just can't seem to stomp out. And while she puts so much of the monarchy behind trying to stomp out these rebels, that she's ultimately losing power to the merchant lords. And her ultimate goal for this, because she's tired of fighting them, was to steal all this death fog from this ship that we can find in Act 2. All the death fog's gone already. It's all been stolen. Beast and Lohar will have a conversation about how obviously that needs to be stopped. Lohar gives you a bunch of information about who to talk to in Arcs, and Beast needs to make his way there. So that's kind of Beast's story for Act 2. He kind of learns what Justinia's endgame is and that he needs to stop it before she kills so many people. And if you remember, I know I mentioned this in Act 1, but just to remind everyone, Queen Justinia is Beast's cousin. They're family. That is it, guys. That is all of Act 2 in a nutshell. Now, real quick, just a couple of other things you would have picked up throughout the act that I think are important. We can find out that there is a distinction between the White Magisters and the Red Magisters. The White Magisters are the leaders, and they know more about what is going on with the Black Ring and the fact that the Magisters are actively forcing the Black Ring to do their bidding. They're capturing Black Ring and forcing them to work and die for the Magisters. A lot of the Red Magisters aren't aware of the higher-up goings-on. And the Paladins that we can meet in Act 2 are learning that the Magisters are working with the Black Ring in a lot of cases. And obviously, that's a problem for the Paladins, as they are the members of the Divine Order, and they hate the Black Ring by, for their very existence. That was the entire point of Divine Divinity, which is about 20 years ago in the timeline of this particular game. Just a couple quick things there I wanted to mention because they'll be important later. So there you go, guys. Act 2. I hope you enjoyed it. This was a ton of effort for me. It was one of the longer videos that I've put together that wasn't actually just a collection of other videos. But thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom. Hit that like, comment, subscribe button to help me out with that YouTube algorithm. And have an amazing day.
Fantastic. Now, on to the interesting part.
After many adventures, the party finally reached the place where Godwo can go to become divine. But more surprises and difficult choices awaited.